Hello and welcome to the vulnerability video. What is a vulnerability? So we're going to define what we mean by vulnerability and why it matters in cyber security. Think of it as a flaw in software that an attacker can use to make the program behave in unintended way. So vulnerability is something that is not right. So from access to execution, what happens next? We've discussed how attackers gain access and execute commands. Now let's look at what unfolds after a vulnerability is successfully exploited. The attacker can do several things, which include the attacker can change how the software runs and often gain control of the system. It can manipulate the system. It can use the system to its own advantage. Why exploitation matters? Once a vulnerability is leveraged, the target software may be forced to act differently than intended. That's the dangerous part. Small coding mistakes can open the door to major compromise. Imagine the software used by a bank that allows loopholes so that attackers can manipulate the software and have access to deleting, changing, and altering. Let's go with the first one here. Small mistakes. Coding error in software can bring about exploitation. Major consequences. System compromise and control is lost. Then we have unintended behavior. Software forced to act differently. So here says developers build software with code. It means that whatever software you see running anywhere was coded, and developers create programs using languages like Java, Python, and others. The end product of software made from many lines of code. If that code has mistakes, it can introduce bugs. And of course, some of the programming languages we use is Python, Java, C, and many others. Then code creation involves having thousands of lines written by developers. So it means that this written code has the potential of having error, which can lead to bugs. And under potential bugs, mistakes in code can introduce vulnerabilities. Now we have deployment and exposure. After testing, software is deployed to servers or machines. So the word testing there means that when the software is completed, it needs to be tested before it can be deployed. If it is exposed to the internet, for example, when open services like FTP, SSH, or web hosting, it becomes reachable and potentially attackable. So for deployment, software moves to production servers and machines after the testing phase. And for internet exposure, open services like FTP, SSH, or web hosting makes systems reachable and vulnerable to attack. So when a system is deployed locally, there is no connection to the outside world. So for a system to be vulnerable, it must have a sort of connection to the outside world. So let's talk about bugs and exploitable bugs. Not every bug can be weaponized. Some bugs are harmless, while others let an attacker manipulate the program. When a bug can be abused to change behavior or gain control, we call it an exploitable vulnerability. Let's talk about harmless bug. These are minor issues with no security impact. Sometimes a program could run well on a particular device, but has issue with another particular device. So such a program can be patched so that it runs seamlessly on every hardware. Under exploitable bugs, these are flaws that enable attackers to manipulate behavior and gain control of a system or program. So let's talk about what attackers do after a successful exploit. Attackers deliver a payload or a remote shell to the compromised machine or the target that gives them a foothold to run commands or steal data, basically to do whatever they want with that system. So let's talk about number one, payload delivery. Attackers send malicious code to the compromised machine. And two, remote shell access establishes a foothold to run commands on the system. And three, lateral movement, move through the network to access other systems. And four, data theft, extract sensitive information from the compromised environment. So let's look at naming and tracking vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are tracked with identifiers like CVE numbers. So you might have seen this somewhere. That is where we track vulnerabilities in order to have a proper documentation of the kind of vulnerabilities that existed and what period they existed, especially when it was discovered. So vulnerabilities are tracked with identifiers like CVE numbers that include the year they were recorded. This helps vendors and researchers track and reference specific flaws over time. CVE numbers are common vulnerabilities and exposures identifiers that include the year recorded. Tracking systems help vendors and researchers reference and monitor specific flaws across time. Let's talk about 0 days, unpatched and urgent. A 0 day is a vulnerability that vendors haven't fixed yet. For example, you deploy a software and there is vulnerability, but that vulnerability has not been detected yet. Such a vulnerability is called a 0 day. And since it has not been detected and it is vulnerable, it can be attacked and an attacker can gain access into the system or software. So when critical 0 days are found, vendors usually rush to patch them. And this patch has to do with updates after a software release. But some 0 days have been exploited in the wild for months before discovery. Of course, if it's not patched on time, it could be discovered and it's going to last for some period before it will be detected and finally patched. Definition: 0 day is vulnerabilities that vendors have not yet patched or fixed. Vendor response: critical 0 days trigger urgent patching efforts. Active exploitation: some 0 days are exploited in the wild for months before discovery. This here is a historic example when exploits leak. Cases when powerful exploits were used secretly and later leaked, causing widespread damage. When such tools fall into the wrong hands, the consequences can be severe and fast. So when powerful exploits are leaked, they can cause widespread damage rapidly. The consequences of such tools falling into the wrong hands are severe and far-reaching. Vulnerabilities aren't always technical. Security gaps are not just code problems. Imagine a perfectly hardened network behind a top-tier firewall. Still, human factors can create openings that bypass technical defenses. Now let's look at social engineering examples. Now imagine an employee named John who loves car photos. He likes exploring different cars and the pictures online just for fun. He gets an email that looks like it came from a coworker with an image attached. He opens it without suspicion, and that image secretly executes malware from John's computer. An attacker could pivot deeper into the company's network. So imagine you work in a bank. I'm going to use a bank because such an establishment requires security 24/7. So John receives an email with an image and he's using this on company's system. So John downloads the image. If that image is infested with a malware, the malware will execute on the system and John will not know what is going on. To him, he has seen an image, but to the attacker, the malware is going to execute, and from there a payload has been dropped, and from John's system the hacker can navigate to other connected systems in that bank. So this is called social engineering. So why social engineering? Because they discovered that human beings are weak due to lack of knowledge. The reality is that most real world breaches happen because people are tricked, not because someone found a rare technical bug. Why it works? Social engineering is often easier and more reliable for attackers than hunting for obscure vulnerability. So what next we have in this series? In the next video we will cover remote shell and the types of access we typically deploy after exploiting a target. Then hands-on labs. After that, we will move to hands-on lab and start practicing safe, ethical techniques to test and secure systems. We'll be seeing payload and how to create one. Now, are you ready to start practicing hacking ethically? Well, that wraps up our high-level look at vulnerabilities and social engineering. Remember, these lessons are for ethical testing and improving security. In upcoming lessons, we'll get practical. We're going to use the real tools. We're going to also use the real techniques, but always within a legal and ethical framework. So here is what you take away from this. Security is not just about technology. It's about people, awareness, and ethical responsibility. That is all for this video, and I will see you on the next one.